Hey, it's me, Jake, and in this lesson I want to take a look at 4 seemingly simple chords and analyze them through the lens of music theory to help us develop 6 different strategies we can use to compose melodies or lead lines on top of those chords. And like I said, the chords are pretty simple. We're just going to have an E minor, a G major, an A major, and a C major. And we're just going to loop those. E minor, G major, A major, to C major. And before we go any further, I do recommend you just take a quick pause, write those chords down, and try to figure out on your own, what key is that in? How would you approach this as a guitar player or a lead player? What scales are you thinking of? And really, how would you just generally parse this simple progression? Now, I'd like to start with the simplest approach, and that is to just recognize that everything revolves around this chord, E minor. E minor is where things start, E minor is where things end, and the simplest thing you can do if you don't have a lot of music theory is just rock out pentatonic minor. This is a classic guitar player answer to everything. The pentatonic minor scale works in almost every kind of scenario where there is a tonal center, and I went through several examples of that in my video, Pentatonic Possibilities. So one of the lessons in that video was that pentatonic minor works almost anywhere. So over this chord progression, just by recognizing that we have a tonal center of E minor, it enables me to think, okay, I could get away with playing E pentatonic minor on top of this entire 4-chord progression, and it should sound pretty good. Let's take a listen. Now, the backing track I was playing there is one that I produced myself, and I actually live streamed the whole process of me recording and producing that because I have been getting more requests about production lessons. So instead of uploading them here onto this channel, I am going to be uploading those videos onto a new channel aptly titled Jake Lizio, and that video is linked below in the description. So obviously, noodling up and down pentatonic minor works just fine in this scenario, but what if we wanted to take things a step further and we wanted to noodle up and down the natural minor scale? Well, we are going to run into some problems, and here's the deal. The E minor scale has an E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, and E. And if we look at those chords, we have an E minor chord, we have an F sharp half diminished chord, we have a G major chord, an A minor, a B minor, a C, a D, and of course back to E minor. And hopefully you see that in our original progression, 3 of those chords come straight from the key of E minor. The E minor comes from the key of E minor, the G is the 3 chord, the C is the 6 chord. The odd man out here is this A major. A major is not in the key of E minor. A major has a C sharp note in it, and there is no C sharp note in my key of E minor. So we have a little bit of conflict here. To resolve that, I want to think about what happens to an E minor scale if I just take all of my C naturals and turn them into C sharps instead. What I get is a scale of E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, and E. And that scale is E Dorian. And E Dorian would be an excellent choice for scales over that A major chord. That A major chord can be thought of as being borrowed from E Dorian. So over that A major chord, what we'll experiment with doing is exclusively over that A major chord, we will play E Dorian. But for the rest of the chord progression, over those other 3 chords, we will play the E minor scale. Basically, we're playing with modal mixture or modal interchange here. Now, I know that was a big step up in complexity, going from pentatonic minor to modal mixture. So let's take it back a step down, make things a lot easier. One thing we can do is just add in a single note to our pentatonic minor scale to give it a little bit of Dorian flavor. So if we're playing E pentatonic minor, and if we just add in the natural 6th, C sharp, we have this little abbreviated Dorian scale, which I really like to use as a soloing device because it's so familiar to my fingers and it's so close to being just regular pentatonic minor. So instead of thinking modal mixture and stuff like that, instead, this time, what I'm going to do is go back to just spamming pentatonic minor. I'm going to be noodling pentatonic minor, but every time that A major chord comes up, I will make it a point to really accent that C sharp right here and right there as well to really kind of indicate to the listener that we're highlighting that A major chord. We're getting a little bit of Dorian flavor in there. So up until this point, we've really been interpreting everything as being the key of E minor, and then we're grabbing from a little bit of E Dorian. But let's flip everything on its head. Let's pretend we're in the key of E Dorian, because 3 of these chords are in the key of E Dorian. E minor's in E Dorian, G major's in E Dorian, A major's in E Dorian. C is the odd man out in E Dorian. So let's really focus, let's really promote this Dorian flavor over E minor, over the G, over the A, and then when C comes up, we'll slip into E minor instead. And that'll give us a really different effect than what we had before. Now it's going to be mostly Dorian with a little bit of minor, instead of mostly minor with a little bit of Dorian. And if this kind of thing was going on throughout the song, I would actually write this in a different key signature. I would really write this with the key signature of D major, which is the same as E Dorian. And that's less accidentals, and it really helps us understand what the lead player should be doing. They should be playing lots of C sharps over the E minor chord, over the G chord, over the A chord. And it's only when the C chord comes around where the C natural starts coming back. Now let's put the scales aside a bit and let's instead just focus on the chords themselves, the chord tones, and the arpeggios. Every one of these chords we played only has 3 notes. So like E minor only has the 3 notes E, G, D, E, G, D. The G major is just a G, B, D, G, B, D. The C major chord, A major is just an A, C sharp, E, A, C sharp, E. And the C major chord was just C, E, G, C, E, G. So even by just doing this, just by playing those arpeggios, you can hear the chord progression start to develop in your ear because I'm playing the notes of the chord. So as a soloer, if I'm writing melodies or if I'm playing solos and improvising, obviously I want to be thinking about those arpeggios. They're really, really great sounding and we can string them together very, very easily. And as a lead player, I love stringing together arpeggio passages. So let's find a way to do that in a very simple fashion, and that way we have a fun little arpeggio lick we can throw in to the middle of our pentatonic playing or our Dorian playing. E minor, for example, could just be played like this. We have an E and a G and a B. So here's a simple arpeggio shape, and we could play it a million ways. You could just do pull-offs, like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. You could do a pull-off like that and then a return, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could tap this. You could do a tap here, and then pull off all the way. So any way you want to play these 3 notes, I really don't care. I just think it's fun to be hanging out on these 3 notes for the E minor chord. When that E minor chord comes up, instead of thinking of a full scale, maybe just hang out on 3 little notes of the E minor arpeggio. Then, when G major comes around, look at this. We've got this simple little G major shape right here. We've got a G, a D, and a B. So that'll be my shape that I'm going to go to. I'm just going to land on that when G major comes around. When the A major chord pops up, here's a very simple way to play an A major arpeggio. I've got an E, I've got a C sharp, and an A. Those are the 3 notes of A major. And then lastly, when the C major chord comes up, well, here's an E and a G and a C, E, G, C. So you can hear the chord progression now. Coming out of just that simple arpeggio pattern. So I'd like to try to slip some of that into our scale playing, hear how that actually affects our solo. Now, our last strategy is going to rely on us going deep into our chord progression to try to discover some inherent properties within it that we can help promote and highlight as a lead player or composer. And specifically, what I'd like to take a look at is some chromatic passage that already occurs within this chord progression. In the G major chord, which is our second chord in the progression, inside that G major chord, there's a D note. And then, inside the A major chord, there's a C sharp note. And then inside the C major chord, there's a C note. And then when it resolves back to E minor, there's a B note. So did you hear we have this chromatic passage starting on our second chord? We have a D to a C sharp to a C to a B. And if we kind of accent that here, if we sing the B, D, C sharp, C, B, D, C sharp, C, that's a cool little line that already exists within the voicings of the chords themselves. Now that I've recognized that, I feel like that is a potent little line that I can borrow from and start injecting into my solos. At the simplest level, you could just play those 4 notes and highlight them as those chords come up. But what I would rather do is kind of embed that descending passage in the middle of a lick somehow. So think of a repeating pattern that keeps repeating itself, but the only thing that changes is that one note. That'll really catch the listener's ear. Something very simple like this. Imagine if I'm on, I start on the note B, and I go kind of up and down my pentatonic scale, all right? So I'm going B, D, E, G, E, and let's just modify that now so it starts on a D. And now let's modify it so it starts on a C sharp. And let's modify it so it starts on a C. So now I've got this 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Right? So you can hear that descending passage creeping along its way in there, and if I can incorporate that over the chords, that should sound pretty interesting. Now, this entire question came about because one of my wonderful Patreon subscribers had sent the question to me asking, how am I supposed to solo over this chord progression? And as you can see, there's not one answer to that. And this isn't even all the answers. We could keep going with this kind of stuff all day. But I wanted to just really kind of briefly describe to you the big areas that I'd be thinking about if I had time to compose. I mean, obviously, if you're just throwing the chord progression on stage, you're going to have to think on your feet. But if you do have time to analyze things and really look at the connections between things, you can come up with some really good music and some good options. That's why I like this stuff, is every one of these sounded different to me. And the whole idea of being a good composer is having different options. You don't want everything to be one-dimensional and always sound the same. You want to have choices. You want to be able to say, I need to ramp this up to sound more aggressive or less aggressive. And, if you don't have choices, how are you supposed to compose? So for me, as somebody to look at this chord progression and have kind of 6 different areas, 6 different choices, that to me is confidence. That is empowering, and it's fun too. It means that I can play around with something new. It's not going to get stale. I can play around with arpeggios or chromatics. You can see we talked about those embedded chromatics. There's a lot of richness embedded into those simple 4 little chords. So it's very easy to just draw the conclusion right away when you see a simple set of major chords and minor chords. Be like, oh yeah, it's pop music. It's 4-chord rock. Take another look, because there's sometimes a lot going on in there. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. And if you did, please thank my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. They're the only sponsors I would like to work with at this point, and without them, these videos would not exist. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.